Great. Perfect. Welcome to the participants of this new webinar. The webinar is in the seminar series in value creation organized by the AIM Research Center on Artificial Intelligence in Value Creation. And today we have a very important speaker. Unfortunately, the webinar is still online, is not in the campus in a face-to-face, but hopefully we'll move soon in a physical way. So our speaker today, and thanks, is Professor Bjorn Evans from Otto Friedrich University, Bamberg, Germany. And the topic is how AI is changing the nature of B2B products. We have with us also, Bjorn is planning to present a research project, and we have with us also Catherine Bardot, who worked early on this research project. So thanks also Cathy. Cathy is member of the research center, and we will have also a contribution in the Q&A. Just 2 words about this seminar, maybe mostly for those who have never attended the seminar before, and also for Bjorn. The seminar series in value creation has the goal to invite the top scholar, professors who are leading professor in the different topic, and the goal is to open and give us a new way of thinking, new insights that could inspire the researcher in the research activities, the doctoral student, the postdoc, to get a new way of thinking, the discipline of management impacted by artificial intelligence and disruptive technologies. At the same time, I decided also to open this seminar series also to companies, so to the MBA, but also the people working in companies, because their contribution is important for our research and also for the common practice, in the daily practice. The goal of this series is to stimulate interdisciplinary research. Today we will focus more on the B2B marketing, which is a very emerging and promising area. In particular, to study the impact of technologies and AI in B2B is something very important, considering that the industrial marketing, it was one of the industrial field was one of the first to adopt robots and artificial intelligence system to replace maybe some more standardized and rote tasks. The seminar today is part of a calendar. We have already invited 5 big speakers in the past months, and also we are planning to have other events. Next April, there will be also a fellowship presentation where different researchers inside the research center will present the state of the art of their research project. And then in May, we have another important event focused more on sociology of AI. So it is a big honor to spend words and to introduce the speaker, our speaker today, Professor Bjorn Evans. I simply say 2 words, then Bjorn, be free to integrate what is missing in your rich biography. Bjorn is the chair professor of sales and marketing at Otto Friedrich University, Bamberg in Germany, and he holds a PhD and HDR from the University of Nuremberg in Germany. And previously, he was also a full professor at HSL Lausanne. We invited today Bjorn because his research focuses on B2B markets, relationship, digital transformation, digital business models, and also he has plenty of publication and also academic commitment, and he was involved in work on strategic account management, governance mechanism, pricing, the role of sustainability initiatives and business markets. So definitely a big expert in the B2B side of marketing. So thanks for joining us. Cathy, if you want to say 2 words, as you are the main player inviting Bjorn.
No, just maybe to thank you again, Margarita, for giving us the opportunity to present in this seminar series. And just to share my pleasure to have Bjorn Evans with us today, not only as a co-author, but as a great expert in business-to-business issues, and of course as a friend, which is something important. And as you mentioned it, our position in looking at the digital transformation is a bit specific because we are a B2B marketer, and the idea is to raise the question of digital transformation from the point of view of B2B marketer, which means we are interested in what digitalization, AI, smart products are changing in the way we are doing marketing, which means changing in exchanges, changing in relationship, changing in actors, changing in resources. So thanks a lot for the opportunity given.
So thanks, Kati. Now, Bjorn, the floor is yours. And we organize, as usual, this seminar. We will have a speech by Bjorn first, and then we'll organize the Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to write your question in the chat or in the Q&A part, and then we will answer all the questions just after. Thanks, Bjorn, for joining.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for having me and our work, basically. And so I'm really looking forward to this presentation on how AI is changing the status of B2B products. And before I move into the topic, please let me make a disclaimer, because this is by no means my single-authored work that I'm presenting today, but it's a lot the work that Kathy and Margareta and I have developed together in a paper that was published very recently. And you will also find elements from another piece of work that we have just presented in a conference that is specialized on B2B markets, the IMM Summit in Copenhagen. And there are some other bits and pieces that I have muddled together for you to show you our thinking, the way of thinking that we have developed together in our discussions over the years now. Unfortunately, it's already years. It's as if we had only started working on this 2 weeks ago, but no. And also we plan to go on in this perspective over the next years in our collaboration. So this is really teamwork, and I have been elected the speaker, so to say. But I think also that my co-authors will be very happy to participate in the discussion and take your questions just as much as myself. Before I move into the topic also, because the University of Bamberg may not be on the radar of every one of you, it's in the beautiful region of Bavaria in Germany. It's a very nice touristic city, 70,000 inhabitants. The entire central part of the city is UNESCO World Heritage, and it's a beer brewing capital, as you would expect a city in Bavaria to be. At the moment, it's not as full as it is usually, but we hope to find all of our Chinese, Japanese, American, Italian, French, and so on tourist friends to return soon. It's really a nice destination in case you don't yet know where to travel first after the COVID pandemic. Consider Bamberg. It's a nice place. The University of Bamberg, where I work, and really only in 2 words, was founded in 1647. We're a medium-sized university with 13,500 students scattered all across the historic city, with modern buildings from our IT departments all the way to our central lecture hall. Our president always says we are the only German-speaking university that has an English-style lecture hall, the former Dominican church, where we usually have all of the big ceremonies that take place in the university. If you've never heard about the University of Bamberg, then you are probably not in sociology or psychology or in IT, because some of my colleagues there are really capacities in their fields. But you might have heard about the university recently if you're interested in the reconstruction of Notre Dame de Paris, because my colleagues from our archaeological department are actually part of the team of academic institutions that have been designed by the French ministry in charge of the reconstruction process to help, because they are among the last who did an entire scan of Notre Dame de Paris before the fire. And so they will also be part of the team that helps in reconstructing, which is an honorable job for my colleagues. Margarita and Kathy already mentioned that the work that I do at my department, the sales and marketing department, is very much focused around B2B topics. We're really focused on B2B markets. And the reason for this is that the region of Bamberg and Nuremberg, where I work, is one of the traditional industrial regions in Germany. And we have a couple of leading industrial companies in the area, such as Siemens, but also Schaeffler as a tier 1 supplier to the automotive industry, and some others. And we typically work together with these companies. On the right side, you see some of the companies that we've been working with over the past 2 years, or that we're currently involved with. So B2B is really also something that in the area where I live and teach is important. And as a last piece of introduction, just to situate this, at the University of Bamberg, I'm part of a research center that has been created 5 years ago together with one of the leading Fraunhofer institutes. Some of you may know that the Fraunhofer institutes in Germany are semi-public research institutes. This one is the one for integrated circuits, the ones who invented the MP3 technology, and they sponsored a research center where 7 professors together with PhD students are working on research projects where we look at how the digital transformation changes business models. And here my part again is to focus very strongly on B2B markets. But actually, I'm not here for the publicity part. I'm here for the content side. And what we're really interested in is how artificial intelligence is changing the status of B2B products. And this is the agenda that I have for today. I would like to very briefly say 2 or 3 words about B2B markets. So the perspective with which we approach the topic today, and also the arena in which we have conducted our research. Then I would like to move a bit more extensively to transformations that we have observed on B2B markets and that we observe currently on B2B markets, which then actually have led us to study more specifically what the role of products, and particularly smart products on B2B markets is. And I will explain in more detail later on why we think that this topic was an important one and is an important one. And I will finish with a typical academic output of research, but one that, for example, some of our colleagues in B2B research love. They love 2x2 matrices. And so we produced a typology, a 2x2 typology of smart business products that we can also discuss later on. And I'm very much looking forward also to your perspective on our typology. So that's the plan. And the highlight, of course, is the last point, the discussion part, where we can then really move into exchanging between each other. So I hope you're still with me. That was a sort of fast track introduction first part, but since we're in the country of the high-speed TGV train, I thought you would follow that rhythm. And now we can take a bit more time to look at the different points here. So Margarita and also Kathy already mentioned that we are interested in B2B markets. And B2B markets are a field that students typically are not very interested in when they start studying marketing and sales. Or let's put it differently, it's at least not what they are particularly aware of. Typically what they are aware of and what they are fascinated by is the lower right side, private consumers, and the way how marketing to private consumers works. However, I like to tell students in Bamberg that before we can actually move to this private consumer, there is a huge field of business-to-business transactions that takes place. Everything that is red here is a very classical representation of what constitutes B2B markets, with raw material suppliers, suppliers of parts or half-finished components, capital goods manufacturers, professional service providers, and so on. So actually, there's a whole world of interactions and transactions that take place on B2B markets before, at the very end, we have what occupies so many pages in textbooks, the private consumer. So one of the reasons why we are working on B2B markets is that there are very many researchers looking at consumers, while many transactions actually take place on B2B markets between companies. And the model that I'm showing here is a very, very traditional linear representation of a B2B market, where you have like a value chain flow of materials that in the end produce a finished good that either a professional final customer will use or a private consumer will purchase. The reason why I insist on the fact that this is a very linear perspective and that it's a more traditional perspective is that I would like to now move to how these B2B markets are transformed and have been transformed over the past couple of years. So what is changing? Because this is leading us then to the role of smart B2B products and the role of AI on these B2B markets when we look at the transformations that take place. And these transformations, I would like to develop them starting with a perspective where our thinking that we have exchanged over the past months somehow classifies what happened on B2B markets in the past, what is happening today, and what we expect might happen tomorrow. And my starting point actually is a description that you find in the strategy literature and that is discussed in different fields that says basically many business-to-business markets are under the so-called VUCA transformation. And I'm not going into much detail here because there are tons of literature on these 4 factors that describe the changes that take place on B2B markets: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And whether this VUCA world is a reality in all of its dimensions and so on is also a discussion of its own. But what I would like to highlight here is that this is already a discussion not only of yesterday, but even the year before yesterday. So this thinking in terms of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that transforms business markets is already established. And it manifests itself in changes or trends such as the moves towards more agile supply chains, the moves towards service infusion or servitization, so building services around products on B2B markets. It includes the many challenges of sustainability management on B2B markets, which is really a tremendously important topic now between suppliers and customers on B2B markets. But it also includes aspects such as the increasing focus on customer experience and many more. So many, many tangible changes and challenges lead business markets to change. And for companies on business markets, it becomes more difficult to predict the future because there are many interactions between these different changes taking place. And what we take as a starting point for our research and what we believe has a major impact on how business markets and the products on business markets are going to change are 2 sort of underlying elements that sort of drive the change of B2B markets. And one of them comes from individuals and organizations, so the more human side of B2B markets. And the other comes from systems and technologies, so the not so human side of B2B markets. And let me say a word first about the individual and organizational side, and then move to the systems and technology side. On the individual and organizational sides, what we have observed for years now is that the linear representation of business markets, as I have shown you in the introduction, is actually less and less a good description of how B2B markets work. Actually, we observe, and we already discuss in the literature now for quite a while, that markets are rather networks. For example, because we have phenomena like co-opetition, where one and the same pair of companies can be competitors in certain fields, suppliers and customers in another, alliance partners in others. And so there is no clear linear structure on many of these B2B markets. And the thinking in terms of business ecosystems also shows us more and more how B2B markets are actually not a linear flow of value creation, but rather a sort of ecosystem. This is a representation by a colleague from the University of Cambridge and the Cambridge Service Alliance, where Christoph Urmetzer discussed the air transportation ecosystem. And you can see, without that we go into any detail here, that actually the air transportation market, which at the end on the very right side leads to either the transportation of goods in the cargo sector or the transportation of passengers, is not a linear structure. It's a structure where are many different subsystems of actors, such as information providers, airspace infrastructure actors, airport infrastructure actors, ground infrastructure actors, the aircraft builders and engine builders, but also research parties all come together. And so more and more we see that B2B markets change from a linear logic to an ecosystem logic, where different subsystems of actors who have specialties join their forces together. And actually, one of my favorite articles on business ecosystems is an article that Margarita has published in 2013 in MIS Quarterly, where she talks about, I think, one of the most interesting aspects of business ecosystems, the question who occupies control points in these business ecosystems. So the points where power is located, who controls the value activities and the profits in the ecosystem. And mobility is a second example. And without, again, going into any detail, we can see at the moment at the mobility market how new actors push into the traditional value chain of tier 2, tier 1, and then OEM actors. And we have Uber, we have Tesla, we have Apple, but we have so many other companies pushing into this system that there is a fight for control points in these network-like market structures. So that's my first observation that I have drawn from our discussions with Margarita, with Kathy, and also with Ruichi Wei over the past months, to say B2B markets change on the human side in terms of the individuals and the organizations that work on those markets. And at the same time, we have what you all know, because it's very closely linked to AI, the systems and technologies side of B2B markets, where we have the Internet of Things, we have cyber physical systems, we have blockchain technology or distributed ledgers. And again, all of these link different entities to each other and create network type structures, but now they are not human, they are technical. And so in the combination of these two, we have this networkitization of B2B markets. The IoT or the cyber physical systems part is interesting because first of all, it transforms industries that we would never have linked with digitalization completely. And my favorite example is agriculture. So when you think about agriculture in France, you always dream about the small farm somewhere in the south of France where the farmer has 3 cows, sits in front of the farmhouse and enjoys the sunshine and a glass of red wine. But the reality is that on farms today, we have almost no human intervention in a modern farm. We have digital systems, we have plant data, we have animal data, we have soil data, we have farm management software, we have robotics and drones that act and that collect data, we have sensors that collect and exchange data, we have GPS systems, we have autonomously driving tractors and harvesting machines, and so on and so on. And this is actually what we see very strongly, that on the technological side of B2B markets, there is a strong digitalization that is also not linear. It is a complete network type of digitalization. And the interesting part is that for a very long time, the aim of the people working on the technological side was to make sure that it would mix as little as possible with the human side, the individual and organization side. And the topic that you find in the literature on information systems is the literature on humans in the loop. So humans in the loop, for a long time, as you can see from these quotes, was about making sure that you keep humans out of the technological loop as much as possible. So Lee and colleagues in 2014 wrote, human factors are often the reason for failures. So avoiding to have them in or having them interacting with the technology was more or less the aim and the gold standard. And Krenner from Carnegie Mellon University wrote, whenever possible, secure system designers should find ways of keeping humans out of the loop. And you can even see where these systems were built to integrate humans, that the humans were often rather the weak part, such as in cyber-physical systems that aim to help, for example, handicapped people like here, where the aim was to restore the autonomy of people who were rather helpless because of their neurological or physical condition. So it was more about giving back some level of autonomy to people, to human beings who were so close to failure in this very technical perspective that they needed assistance. But the aim was not to mix the human side and the technological side in a sort of balanced way. It was to keep the human element as low as possible and to use all the capacity of the technological side. And the ideal world was to have technological systems who work without the risk of human failure on one side, and to say, okay, let the humans play on their side of the playground, and we try to keep them apart. And what we argue is that this was also even inherent in the B2B literature, in the literature on business-to-business markets. One of the predominant models that has guided a lot of research on B2B markets is a model that distinguishes between actors, resources, and activities. And very clearly in this perspective, actors were the individuals and organizations, so the human side, and systems and technologies were resources. And I will get back to this representation later on, because today we are moving to a different perspective on this. But historically, there was a very clear cut limit between the technical side and the human side on B2B markets. So those are the two big trends that we see, the human and organizational side and the technological side. And we think that this leads in the future to what we would call a new normal that we refer to as industrial systems of systems. And these industrial systems of systems start to erase this distinction between humans and technology. They bring together human systems, organizations, departments inside companies, groups of actors, individual actors, with different systems of technology. And sometimes the human is the one that is guided by technology. Sometimes it's the human who monitors and controls technology. Sometimes it's the human who is inspired by technology. There are different relationships between the human and technology, but very clearly in the future, we cannot separate between humans and technology anymore. The human needs to be in the loop, and the human cannot be like the minimized element in the loop. The human needs to be an element that is in an intelligent way integrated with technology. And this led us to what we call systems of systems as a concept. There is a whole literature on systems of systems where all types of systems, technological systems, organizational systems, individual humans, actually can be linked together to form larger, superior systems. And without, again, going into detail here, what we believe and what we also find in the literature characterizes these systems, elements such as autonomy, for example. There are subsystems in the larger system of system that can decide that they join the larger system, but they also have the autonomy to withdraw again, such as an organization, a company can decide to join a certain platform system in an ecosystem for a while and then withdraw. But what we also see increasingly is that technological systems can autonomously decide to join such systems and autonomously decide to quit them again, such as in smart agriculture, where, for example, a system of a tractor and a harvesting machine and so on can jointly take the decision that a certain task is finished and that they withdraw from a larger GPS system to stop working in it, but that they decide to reconnect to it when, for example, the weather conditions change and their work is possible again. So this perspective that we propose is a perspective of industrial systems, of systems where groups of technology and groups of humans together combine into super systems. And we find examples of this, for example, in the hospital field, where we have two different groups of humans. We have patients and visitors on the one hand side. We have surgeons and nurses and technicians and analysts and so on as personnel on the other, and they form subsystems in terms of different specialties, and they work together interlinked with software systems and technological systems in this representation that I have drawn again. So today in a hospital, there is no separating human and technological systems, but it's more about the intelligent combination of different technological systems, different human systems into an overarching system of systems. Which leads me to my ARA model that is so prominent in the business-to-business world. And our thinking is that today, actually actors and resources will become increasingly difficult to separate in this terminology, because the humans are not necessarily always the actors. The humans sometimes become the resources. And sometimes AI leads technological systems to take decisions where humans are used as resources. And the actor is actually the technical element, the technological element that AI enables to analyze and to take decisions. So this somehow historical split between actors and resources does not necessarily hold anymore. And we have some what we used to consider as resources, so machines, that thanks to AI on B2B markets become actors, and some what we used to define as actors, so human beings, become the resources who receive orders from the machines because the machines have analyzed, the machines have used data to take decisions, and now the human is asked to execute a certain task. So this is the first element that we have seen in the background. And with this sort of ride through the changes on B2B markets and the new normal, I will in a minute get to this point of what's the role of products in there. Before I do this, I would just like to briefly complete this slide that I use as a sort of guiding tool by one element that I have not tackled here. And the one element that we have today is the global pandemic. And I only want to show it to make sure that you see we have it in mind, but we do not want to discuss it today in this seminar with its effect. Here we're focusing on AI and how it transforms products and business markets. We have colleagues at Copenhagen Business School, for example, who have published on the changes that AI brings, that the COVID pandemic brings to business markets. I would refer you back to those, but we do not want to focus on the COVID crisis here. What we want to focus on are actually now, in the second half of this seminar, products on B2B markets, products in this changing system of business-to-business markets between technology and, on the other hand, between the human changes that we find. And now you could ask, then why products? Products, oh, this is old-fashioned. This is so has been. Products is at the beginning of marketing. At the very beginning, marketers did not try to understand customers. They held products in their hands and they said, God, I have to sell them. So how do I market them? How do I get rid of them? And products also, if you read the literature, have not received much attention lately. And lately means over the past 10 to 15 years, I would say, because we have been so fascinated by services. And thinking and discussing more about this point, we came to the conclusion that it is important to keep products at the center of analysis on B2B markets for at least two reasons. The first is that historically, products have always been at the center of analysis on B2B markets, whether it's raw materials, whether it's projects and project marketing, nuclear power plants, airports, and so on, or whether it's in contract manufacturing and other fields of B2B markets. B2B markets have always been built around products, and that has not fundamentally changed. But the second element is also that in our perspective of B2B markets of the future, as industrial systems of systems, we believe that the smallest unit of analysis for an industrial system of systems is, in the tangible element, a product that a company sells, like a tire, like a helmet, for example, a protection helmet for construction site workers, like a forklift and others. You will see that we will find these types of products again in a couple of minutes, helmets, forklifts, and others. But we believe that in a larger systems of systems perspective, if you want to strategically analyze these systems of systems and understand where they are going, you need to maintain the individual product on your radar. You need to understand how the individual product plays a role in these superordinate industrial systems of systems. And so here we go, the role of products on B2B markets. Our starting point when we looked back at products in the literature was that we observed two quite opposite aspects. First of all, products are typically linked to what we could call physicality. Whether you call them products or goods or whatever, they are typically linked to the fact that they are physical. And for a long time, the definition of a service was that it was intangible. So products, tangible, services, intangible used to be the logic. And because in the services literature, there was such a strong interest to also strengthen the attention for services, the physicality, the physical aspect of products has been diminished in its importance quite systematically, whether it's through the whole literature on service dominant logic, or whether it's through the literature on service infusion, servitization, and customer experience. All of these articles typically claimed that the product was just like a necessary evil, a sort of necessary physical small element that allowed the much more important part of providing service. We can discuss this later on, how your perspective on this is, but the literature actually drew away the attention from physicality, and a lot of it drew it away in the service literature. On the other side, we saw that in the IT, in the information systems literature, the physicality was very strongly in the foreground in many articles, particularly as the IoT, the Internet of Things, and cyber physical systems received more and more attention. And for example, Porter and Happelman wrote, what makes smart connected products fundamentally different is not the internet, but the changing nature of these things. So they really highlighted the fact that smart products remain things, they remain physical, and they will render a different way of utility, but they are still physical things, and we should not diminish this role of physicality. So we were struck by these very opposing sort of arguments in the literature, and we went a bit deeper into what has been written on products, and actually you find very different streams of thinking about what a product is, why it is important, and what you can study about a product. For example, for a long time, the product was seen as a variable, something that needs to fulfill a need, and that you will adapt to the needs of the customer over time. For example, the customer wants to close a door and be sure that whatever is behind the door is safe. Now, it's not necessarily a key that the customer wants, not the key of a huge size to feel safe. The customer wants an efficient closing solution, and if it's a small key to a very strong lock, or even a different type of solution, such as a magnetic card, that solves the problem. So the product in this sense is variable. It's a product still, it's physical, whether it's a key out of iron or whether it's a magnetic card, but it can change over time. It has a certain amount of variability in the stream of research that Spring and Araujo described in 2017. The service dominant logic, on the other hand, says goods are distribution mechanisms for services. So actually, goods are not interesting from their point of view. It's the service that they allow to obtain that is interesting. And they write the appropriate unit of exchange is no longer the static and discrete tangible good. So they believe that tangible goods are static and discrete. We hope to show a different perspective with our view of smart products in a couple of minutes. But you have this school of thinking. And a third example is the school of thinking that analyzes how an existing product actually is at the center of a network of actors. So here we find this network perspective again, where you can say a product requires so many different contributors and it affects so many different actors that what is interesting to study actually is the role of the product inside the network of actors. And this is something that we found helpful thinking about smart products that are more and more integrated actually into electronic networks where they communicate, that we said it's really interesting to see these different perspectives on products. And we would like to better understand how we can view the many smart products that nowadays start to mark the B2B markets that we are so interested in. Such as this example here, a smart helmet developed in Australia, not surprisingly, because actually construction sites in Australia in the Australian summer are a really dangerous area for workers to work at, because when you have like 45 degrees in the shade and something like 65 in the sunshine, then the worker under the helmet very quickly risks to have heart problems or other problems. And so this company invented a smart helmet that measures transpiration, that measures the heat underneath the helmet, and that will send warning signals to the worker, but also to the supervisor. And this is one very simple example of the many smart products that we discovered when we started our research, and that made us interested in the role of these smart products and how these smartness elements actually transform the products on the markets. So we defined for ourselves the category of smart business products, which are products sold on B2B markets, previously non-digital products that now are equipped with additional informational features that allow communication. And so what we find on these products are sensors, actuators. They are related to software. They produce information protocols. And our research questions very quickly were directed at how do business products change when they become smart, or at least smarter than they used to be in the past. And actually, we had some funny minutes when we tried to discuss what the opposite of a smart product is. And we did cultivate the language of a dumb product. So if it's not smart, it must be dumb, the traditional classical product. Maybe you have a better suggestion for our future works, but so far we still refer to the classical products as dumb as opposed to smart. The second question related to this was, how does a business product that becomes smarter change its relationship with the surrounding network of entities? And here we very expressively picked up this perspective on products as, thanks to technology, being the part of a network of human and non-human entities with which the product will now be related through communication, exchange, interaction. So let me stress again at this point, we are researchers on B2B markets. What we have always been interested in is interaction between companies, interactions around exchanges. And this is why we allow ourselves to study AI on B2B markets, because we come with an interaction perspective. We are by no means the technological experts, but what we do observe is how these AI elements, how smartness changes the character of products and the way how these products are included in networks. So this is what we were interested in. And so what did we do? Well, actually, we chose to start with a qualitative piece of research where we said, let's find examples of smart business products. What is out there? And we scanned different markets, went on internet sites of companies, and we found actually a large number of examples, but we boiled it down to 12 cases of smart products on B2B markets that we decided provided quite a bit of variance, quite a bit of different aspects that we could study. And we analyzed the data that we connected regarding how much the product, every one of these 12 products was actually modified by the fact of becoming a smart business product, how much the ecosystem around the product was impacted. And a third aspect that we also found interesting was the question whether the smartness allowed these products to behave autonomously, take decisions of their own, or whether they remained under the direction of other entities of decision and as such were not autonomous. And I will show you in a minute how many of the products we perceive to be autonomous. It's rather a minority, but let's not forget, we're only at the beginning of a trip into smartness of products and the digital transformation of B2B markets. So this is the study that we did. And here are the 12 products that we studied. It's very heterogeneous, as you can see: smart farming, smart truck tires, smart pumping, smart cranes. Actually, two different companies with two different solutions, which explains why we have two smart crane cases here. We also have two smart forklift cases because the two cases that we studied were different. The one by Linde and the other by ZF. We have construction equipment, Volvo. We have smart wind farms, smart meeting rooms in office buildings, and so on. So quite a heterogeneous collection of different examples, but which allowed us, we believe, to identify a certain number of interesting characteristics of these products in the first step. And after these first characteristics that I present to you, then I will move to our typology through which we try to structure a bit more what we have found and to classify each one of our examples in more detail. So the first finding that we observed was that smart business products are still products. And now you might say, has this guy in Bamberg had a bit too much of red wine or beer before lunch? How is this a finding? But of course, at the outset, we were not quite sure. When we started looking at these examples, we were wondering, will these products still exist in functions, in product functions, or will their move be very much in line with the argument of the service dominant logic, actually an abandoning of the core classical functions and more move towards services? And what we observe is that, of course, there are certain services associated to the smartness that we find in these products, but the smart business products are still products. The helmet is still a helmet. It still protects. The forklift is still a forklift. It still transports. The crane is still a crane. It still lifts. But there are additional features that the smartness allows on top. So the first observation is the smartness, in our examples at least, has not fundamentally changed the product characteristic of what we have collected as cases. The second observation is the smartness of a smart business product is sometimes quite visible, but in many cases it's not easily visible or even not visible at all from the outside. So for example, truck tires that are smart typically cannot be identified as such from the outside because the sensors are rather located on the inner side of the tire. And so they are invisible to the eye, and the smartness does not become clear for the external observers. When you look at trucks or other vehicles, then sometimes you can see the tiny elements where the sensors are integrated in the truck, and you can identify that they are smart, but it's not a prominent, visible element. In other examples, and particularly, for example, the cobot manufacturer that we looked at, it's quite clear that here we have to do with a smart product, because the cobot, a robot that works together with a human being and in a teamwork situation, obviously is smart, has sensors, obviously analyzes its environment. So we have different levels of visibility in terms of the smartness. Thirdly, we see smart business products as what we could call convergence entities. They capture information from entities and they re-communicate information to other entities. They sometimes constitute a sort of platform, not all of them, but some of them receive and send, such as, for example, some of the smart farming devices, such as a tractor, for example, can receive information and send information at the same time. And so some of the smart business products constitute a sort of binding element between other entities in a system of systems. Fourthly, smart business products are building blocks, small building blocks, but important building blocks in the larger systems of systems that I have explained before. And usually they are one specific part with a very specific function in a larger system of systems. And when every one of the different subsystems joins together the information, then there is a sort of big picture that is produced, such as when a harvesting machine together with a tractor, together with sensors that are in the soil on a farm, sensors that analyze animal health, for example, a meteorological station on the farm that captures meteorological data, but also data coming from weather forecasts, GPS system information. When they all join together, they allow a much bigger picture as a system of system than the already smart subsystem or the already smart product in the entire system. And finally, we have also looked at this element of autonomy. And here we see that we have some smart products that are hardly autonomous. They really depend on actions of a human being, such as the smart crane, where humans still need to take every important decision. Some, such as helmets, have limited autonomy, where they take some decisions, they can process some types of activities. And then we have, such as in smart farming, advanced systems where some elements, such as a tractor or a harvester, can be quite autonomous in the way how they are guided by a GPS system, for example. So those are some of the key findings that we also published in our article. And we wanted to go a step further and say, okay, but can we classify these different products that we have observed a bit more? And so we went into typology building, and we picked two dimensions that we thought were or came out as quite important to describe these smart business products. The first is, how much does the smart business product change the function of the basic, the original, the dumb product? And the second is, to what extent the smart business product becomes a highly networked product when it's smart, or whether it still only has a few contact points with other products. Let me be more clear on this in a minute, but based on these two dimensions, we identified 4 types of smart business products. And these 4 types that you see here are represented on my next slide, where you have the graphical representation of them. So you find again the 2 axes. The x-axis is the sort of integration of the smart business product into a wider network of entities. Some of them have rather limited integration, such as, for example, the smart tires. On the other hand, we have smart industrial vehicles, like in smart farming, but also, for example, on construction sites, the front loaders and so on that roll on a large construction site. They can have numerous connections with different entities. So this is our first dimension. And on the y-axis, you have, on the lower side, those smart business products that more or less still fulfill the same basic function, such as smart tires, prioritarily still are there to allow a truck to roll, but they send information that allows predictive maintenance. But the main function is still driving. And on the other end of the y-axis, we have those smart business products where there is a strong change in the functional focus of the product, such as for the smart helmets, for example, where now health, security of workers, being able to control at all times whether a construction site in the heat, for example, should be closed down for a couple of hours and so on, can be taken as a decision. So we have these 4 different fields that we identify as our typology. Every one of them is briefly described here, but I think you have hopefully gotten the main message here so far. And we can skip back to this slide in the discussion anyway. But this is, so to speak, the second and the sort of academic outcome of our research, this typology. And to summarize in a nutshell, as my last slide, the implications of our work, we believe that on the theoretical side, this allows to start a new research program on products in a B2B context, which will allow not to sort of forget about this physical side of products and at the same time distinguish between different types of smart products. And on the managerial side, it also highlights again the question of what is the value proposition of my product and my company on a B2B market, and how does smartness, how does the digital transformation change the value proposition that I can give sometimes to a very old product such as a helmet. There have been helmets protecting the heads of people since the Greek and the Roman fighters and probably the Persians and the Egyptians before. And it's now that we have a new value proposition apart from the immediate shock protection that comes up. And it also renews our view on customer information, because of course, every one of these products allows collecting a lot of data about how the customer, the farmer, the construction company, whatever the smart product that we're looking at, but the user company collects data, and the supplier of the product could potentially collect that data, analyze it, and draw additional value from this customer information. And this is basically our sort of presentation TGV part. And now I'm very much looking forward, together with Margareta and Kathy, to hear your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and discuss this with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for this clear and super interesting presentation. I want just to stress that the research center is looking at in this direction, which is very promising. As you said, there are different colleagues, Cathy Pardot here, but also Richie Way, that are working in this field. And so it is very promising to look at how AI is impacting market and networks, so the B2B perspective. We have already, maybe Cathy, do you want to add something before we move to the discussion?
That's perfect. We already have several questions, so I don't know, Bjorn, if you can have access to the chat.
I should be able to. There's a Q&A here, and the first one says, don't you think that B2B markets have always been characterized by a continuous change process since there are social processes? Have companies ever been able to predict anything? That's a good one. And the easy answer would be, Kathy, please take over here. But maybe I can give my 2 cents first on this, and then Kathy can complete on this. And I would answer absolutely. B2B markets have always been changing. And I think both Kathy and I have been studying B2B markets for some 25 years now. which allows you to understand that I'm above 50 and Kathy is at least 35 years old, but not older than 36. So she started very early. There have always been changes, no doubt. For example, in the geographic reach of B2B markets, where for a long time, many B2B markets were limited by the possibility to transport goods. Of course, there have been international merchants and traders who have transported goods between Venice and the trading regions in Flanders and so on. But the global reach that we have today is a change that has come about over the past 50, 60 years. There has been technological change before. Of course, the entire industrial revolution, starting from the UK and then spreading throughout the world, has been a change. And I'm absolutely convinced that change is a fundamental characteristic of B2B markets. Also because, let's not forget that almost every patent that changes our world first has an impact on a B2B market before it starts to be interesting on B2C markets. There are, of course, some patents for B2C markets, but very many are first used in a B2B context. So I could not agree more with you, Elsa. But what we believe is happening now is that we abandon this split between the technological side and the human side, and that these are being merged. But I will hand over to Kathy and also Margareta, because this is my very personal perspective on things.
I think, Margareta, you asked for answering the question.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I fully agree with Bjorn, and so I think the continuous process, the continuous change, this is extremely interesting. It's a topic that many scholars, in particular in information system, are looking at. Maybe they use a different terminology, because in the B2B market, and this is one of the topic of discussion also, WCAT is more network and evolution of network. Maybe we are seeing an evolution towards an ecosystem. So the ecosystem opens up the B2B network to different and very heterogeneous industries that collapse and work together. Now the question is, which is the evolution of the ecosystem? So the focus of the studies is how ecosystems are competing, how they evolve, and if there are different ecosystems. I liked a lot what you presented in a system of systems, and this is related also with the following question, that systems of systems, that's exactly the direction, how the business market maybe are evolving. And the question is, if I have two similar ecosystems, how they can compete, or how they will survive, or there is a giant takes all. So these are the open issue of research, because we need also material to test. We cannot speculate.
Yeah.
There was also a question about the prediction and the possibility to predict markets. And I think that B2B markets have always put forward the idea that prediction is very difficult. And for one reason is that since you are in a network, whatever your action, it's going to be limited by the action of others. So the notion of a limited managerial capacity has always been present in B2B literature. What is interesting in prediction is that it is directly connected to the concept of system of system. One particularity of this system of system, mixing those material things, physical things, human things, and all that kind of different system, is that it is generating by nature consequences that cannot be anticipated. So the ability of a company which is connected to another company through the internet or through the smart system, the capacity to anticipate, to predict is really limited because new things are going to merge by the mergings of the connection between those smart products. So the question of a prediction, the question of the anticipation capacity of a company has to be raised again.
And this is an interesting point, because somehow we hope that artificial intelligence is going to allow us to predict better in the future. At the same time, we have all of these prophets who say that the VUCA world with volatility, uncertainty, and so on is going to make it more and more difficult to predict. So it will be very interesting to observe who prevails. But I think we are somewhat safe with the assumption that fundamental changes on B2B markets can be predicted to a certain extent, but it's the speed and the extent of these fundamental changes that's sometimes difficult to predict. Let me give you a very simple example that has nothing to do with AI. I just learned that there's a problem in the purchasing departments of some of the luxury goods manufacturers who manufacture handbags. It can be solved, but they observed a fundamental change, meaning it's more and more difficult for them to buy the skin, the cow skin, actually the calf skin that they need for manufacturing the handbags. Why is that? Because people eat less and less meat. So less calves are killed, less calf skin is available, in particular on the European market, where so far, for quality reasons, they are purchasing the calf skin. So it is somehow predictable when you think about it, that when eating habits change, that also the products that are produced from the cow on top of the meat, such as milk and skin and so on, are going to become less available. But how quickly and to what extent, that is the challenge, even in such a very simple example that has nothing to do with technology.
There's also a question, can you see it, Bjorn, about, it's a question from Ashish about system of system and the link with conflict and power.
Yeah. Power
yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I do think that system of system is not the best concept to explore the notion of conflict and power. For one main reason is that when you look back at the characteristic of system that Bjorn presented quickly, you've got strong indication about the fact that those systems entering the system of systems are totally free to come in the systems or get outside the system. There is no centralization. So the notion of power, the notion of conflict, well, as far as we know, the concept is quite absent from the system of system, which opens on other topics that could be external conflict entering the system. But that's a very nice question, because I think that if ever we want to use SOS to raise the question about the balance of power between human and products, I'm not so sure that we may find indication about how to tackle the problem from the system of system perspective. That's really interesting, because the concept of system just say, okay, if there's a problem in the system of system, there's one policy that is called the triage policy, which explains that if there's a problem, if there's a conflict, let it die. Okay, because it's free to be in the system or outside of the system. There's kind of a what we can call auto-regulation. That means that without any type of centralized power, the system will go on. And that's really interesting to have that kind of conceptualization about how may different things work together in the absence of this centralized power. They do that because they each have their own goals, and put together, they may build another type of goal, but alone they can work, and they can work with a high level of performance. But that remains an interesting question to deal with. How SOS is bringing something new about conflict, and especially about the conflict that may happen between human and machines.
And I think it would be interesting to have Margarita's take on that, because with your work on control points in business ecosystems, actually, you have worked on power in a system environment. It's just not the industrial system of systems perspective, but it's very clearly power and systems.
Exactly. And concerning this, when you talk about the control points, there are control points in who capture the value and who creates the value. So again, there are different control points. Again, they have to be declined according to the specific industrial setting or B2B2C, because every industry is not purely B2B, but maybe there is also a B2B side. It's very difficult, and also it is interesting to map the dynamics of the control points, because the control points are not static. And even if a company take the role of hub, I'm imagining in a platform system with Amazon, maybe in the retail. So even if there is a company who takes the role of hub in capturing value, what is value? Is our revenues or our data? This situation is not stable, because another company can emerge and take maybe the control point. So it's a very complex system that is dynamic, that changes continuously, and it is interesting to investigate better. But again, I would split, so human, business, we are talking about business, not human specifically, because we are not in a, it's true that the consumer are taking a central role now, definitely, but in the logic of ecosystem, it's more a problem of companies that have a central focus. It is a dynamic environment, but again, capture value or value creation, who creates value, who capture value, and they are not always the same.
This pretty much leads us to the question that Sophie Schad has formulated. Do the managerial implications mean that you would renew the way to define value proposition as we know it, for example, from Yves Pigneur and Alexander Osterwalder? And yeah, that's a good question. One thing is for certain that, and we just discussed this role of business models, and there is a reason why I have not included any chart on business models, because in the system of systems perspective, the value creation sometimes is much larger than the value created by one single company. So the business model value creation must insert itself in the systems of systems logic. However, today I would not see a necessity to revise the model by Pigneur and Osterwalder, whether one likes it or not. But the basic idea that at the center of any business model there must be a value proposition that is clearly defined. I would not question that, but the type of value proposition that is generated must be developed and thought in a network perspective and in a perspective where humans and technology interact very closely with each other. That would be my take. So every value proposition of an individual company must be part of, or it might become part of, a larger value proposition of a network in the future.
Maybe just to add to this answer about the change in value creation, one of the characteristics of the SOS, because of this continuous possibility for products to be added or removed, is that if you take the situation from the position of the marketing manager, one issue in terms of value proposition is, what am I going to present to my customer? Where do I stop in talking about the services that my smart products can give, which may be the basic of something that is kind of a risk between a supplier and a customer. Take the value proposition the other way around, and from the point of view of the customer, when I'm buying a smart product, do I buy only a smart product, or do I buy the potential for all the connection that I may have with other smart products, connection that maybe do not exist today? So there might be a risk in the way we are formulating value proposition, because the proposition we make, the products we're selling are always changing. So the impact, the managerial impact of those products becoming smart products are very strong, because they are just questioning the way marketing managers are going to do their job. What am I selling? If what am I selling is always changing and never stops, and always open on other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I may add, value proposition means the product adds a new value layer or potential value layer, and also the concept of ecosystem in the product, the connected car. So the car is no more a car, but the car is also a connected environment, can share data with the smart cities, so enter in a larger ecosystem. But the product itself changes, so the value proposition is amplified thanks to the artificial intelligence and technology, because it's similar as I add new value layer that potentially open the product to different other players and so enlarge the ecosystem. We have also...
Yeah, the next question is, can we get a copy of the slides? And absolutely, yes. As soon as we finish, I will send them to Margarita, and then you can get a copy of the slides.
Okay, so the question by social materiality literature to investigate interaction. Okay, this is done, I think. Let's do with Rupesh. As IoT device have started to take over B2B market, providing algorithm-based products, do you suggest in the future that B2B data sharing would help to optimize the user experience in B2C user experience?
And my answer is yes, and it already does. The data sharing has already taken place. If you use, for example, the relationship between consumer goods manufacturers and retailers, that is a B2B market, and they have been sharing data in efficient consumer response programs, ECR, in category management for a long time. And Procter & Gamble, for example, and Walmart have a huge team that together analyzes customer data and tries to improve customer experience. And the same is true at other stages of B2B markets between, for example, the ecosystem that tries to improve travelers' experiences on air transportation markets, or also medical markets and so on. But I think that it's becoming more and more critical, and that more and more companies will get into the spirit of exchanging data and jointly analyzing data. Because particularly in small and medium-sized companies, this spirit has not been developed so much, according to me and my impressions. Now, maybe Kathy and Margarita or you have other experiences with small and medium-sized companies, but I think that the full potential of collaboration in sharing data has not yet been discovered, particularly by, let's say, the more traditional medium-sized companies, sometimes family-run businesses where the owner says, well, I know how my business works. I've started here with my father when I was 15. Now I'm 65. I really know how this works. But that's my perspective on things.
We have another question by Vincent Jocot.
How difficult would it be, and how long would it take to make the transition from a standard product such as transport pallets to an intelligent product supported by AI? Well, we are not the technological experts, but given that, for example, radio frequency identification, so RFID, has already played a role for quite a while now in logistics chains, I would assume that there are solutions available, and if they are not available right now, they should be available quite soon, because, for example, sensors that allow measuring the weight on a pallet, the heat conditions in which the pallet is transported, for example, and stored, but also the dimensions, or whether the pallet is exposed to scents or smells that are not good for the products inside, or humidity, for example, and so on. I would expect that for logistics, that is a very interesting element to know. But Kathy, Margarita, are you aware of anything?
Maybe one additional point could be, it depends on the ecosystem you want to create. I mean, a smart product could be very simple, and Porter and Appleman were describing those products that are just communicating with your smartphone, for instance. But if you want to create this very complex ecosystem, because you need data that are produced or that are processed by, I don't know, sensors that are far away from your product, and you need to be connected to other systems. In that case, what may be a problem, or what is going to take time, is the connection of other actors. Don't forget that in a SOS, in a system of system that IoT is, every subsystems is autonomous and is independently managed. And in the case that you were giving, Bjorn, about smart farming, you may imagine that you've got different things, just like a satellite with its own governance system communicating with the farm. And so the time you need to have the agreement of everyone to say, okay, we are going to exchange the data, this could be the time, which is not a technological time on the end, but this is the time of the building of this ecosystem. You may think that, for instance, this the brands, a brand like John Deere that we studied a little bit to understand what smart farming is proposing a connection with a competitor. And to be sure that we can make a whole set of different vehicles work one with the other. It took a long time to be sure that the main competitor is going to agree about data exchanges and what will come from the competition. So one part of the answer is about the complexity you want to give to your ecosystem and your smart ecosystem.
Yeah. I'm just briefly skipping back to the overview of our cases here, because the next question by Yiming Gong
that I like a lot, this question. So
is about the cobot. And so we did have the cobot example. It's case 8, and it's about rethink robotics in our example here, where robots help with packaging, material handling, and testing tasks. Equipped with sensors, they can adapt to their environment. And so the case 8 in our typology, we actually, I think, Kathy, had it on the upper right side, right? So it's connected usually to a larger variety of entities, but it depends a little bit on how it is configured and what the precise task of the cobot is. And it has, let's say, new and additional features, because the basic cobot as a material product, as a physical material product, is not very interesting. The basic function is, well, maybe you can take your hand and move it around a little bit, but then it doesn't help a lot. So it's clearly something that brings new additional functions above the physicality of the product. And it's then a matter of what kind of cobot is really, if it's an augmented product or a product as a hub. But the basic version would be an augmented product, as you're writing as well, Yiming.
And if I may, oh, pardon, Kathy, please.
No. When you look at cobot, experts in cobots say if you take away the digital aspect of the cobot, it becomes a main production line. So you're really in the case of an augmented product in that case, but we don't know about what type of evolution those cobots are going to experiment. But by the way, if you look at the cobot in a very extreme situation, they are just like production line with the ability to have that kind of intelligent interface with other collaborators.
Yes, if I may add on this subject, because it's super interesting, and thanks, Yiming, for putting this question. It's true, in this paper, in this study, the cobot is classified in this way, but there is also another research open inside the research center that look at more the application of AI system and robotic, smart robotic enter in the AI system, also in industrial setting. So where the robot assume the role of cobot, is a cobot. I would say that in this case, there is a debate around the replacing of the human, because some tasks that previously were done by human now are done by the robot. So at the end, the task is the same, but it's done by a robot that didn't exist before. It's not a product that is enriched by some AI system, but it is a new AI system, robotic. In terms of value proposition, so augmented product or maybe a completely new product that takes the role of the human for some task, I would say that the value proposition is the opposite, in the sense that the cobot can do some task, but then the human can add value layers. And so at the end, it is the reverse effect. I mean, it's a new product that come up where the human add value layer. It's not as the opposite in the previously. And so the question is now how we can make more efficient my process, what I can add that before was done in a certain way. So it's a problem of human-machine interaction to do the process. And the cobot has other application of robotics in different, more complex tasks, open this change of the product at the end, the change of the way the process is developed. But this is only my thoughts and the area of reflection, because it's a new field of exploration. There is a question by Salma, I think, live. I saw your, please, Salma.
Go on.
Yes, I have two questions. The first question is about related to your findings about visibility of smartness. So when you say visibility, are you referring to the similarity with the human appearance, or is
No, it's actually, it refers to, can we as humans see from the outside easily whether the product is smart or not?
Okay.
So it's not related to whether the product has a similarity with us as humans, which is also an interesting point, actually. But I don't think that in any of our cases that happened. And it's interesting that we did not have a case where this was the intention. But I think I'm walking on thin ice here, but maybe in B2 consumer markets, there is more, let's say, perceived utility in this human aspect.
And for the smartness, is it related to the perception of smartness? Is it related to the perception of a mind in the object?
I'm not quite sure. I hope I understand your question correctly, but the smartness would be related to whether the product can process information, receive information, collect information, communicate information, and ideally analyze the information. And the next higher level of smartness would be to be able to take decisions on itself, the product. So there would even be different levels of smartness. But again, Margarita, Kathy, please add.
Now, I love your question about the mind in the machine. That could be a great question. We are making it very simply, and we just build on, for instance, the definition by Hoffman and Novak, saying that smartness can be measured through the notion of autonomy, of authority, and agency. And they say we do have to talk about a level of smartness. There is no situation, a binary situation with no smartness and smartness on, but different level of smartness, and you can assess the smartness upon this three dimension: agency, autonomy, authority. So which is a good way to escape the question of is there a mind in the machine or not? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So great discussion. I think we are at 1:30, so we are covered the time. Thank you greatly, Bjorn, for joining us, for opening up the discussion. Thanks, Kathy, for leading the discussion part. And thanks to all the participants to this seminar, and see you soon for the next event.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And Margarita, I have put the slides into a Dropbox. I will give you access to the Dropbox because the volume, they're quite big. So, but I will make them available right now.
Thank you greatly. So the seminar has been recorded, so the video will be available on the website. And also, if you are interested in the paper presented by Bjorn, don't hesitate to write us, because it has been published in Industrial Marketing Management, and we can share also the paper.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Bjorn. Thanks to all. Bye.